Procreate Dreams is the incredible 2D animation app for your iPad, and it has huge potential for creating next-level videos and photos. In this class, we'll explore 4 classic animation techniques that involve blending photographs and videos with your own illustrations, special effects, and more. Whether you're into making short-form content, ads, works of art, films, music videos, or motion graphics, the methods of compositing, collage, rotoscoping, and hand coloring can apply. We'll also explore the shooting process for getting useful footage and images, sound mixing, and more. I'm David Miller, a multimedia artist and educator for my studio Primordial Creative in Los Angeles. And for this course, you're going to need an iPad, Procreate Dreams, and the original Procreate app. With that out of the way, let's dive right in. So our first project is hand coloring footage, and this is not too dissimilar from whenever I would learn Adobe Photoshop way back in the day, 2 decades ago, or new students learning how to operate some sort of editing software. You start with something that's really basic, and then you're just going to add or repair something on it. So hand coloring footage is a great way that we can learn both the effects and the tracks of Procreate Dreams without having to go into the long spiel of here's where all the controls are. Inspiration for this project started with these white wedding dresses and an all-white studio, meaning that we already had an outfit, we already had a place. I was definitely inspired by the hand-tinted vintage photographic look, which has always been really popular, well over 100 years, and the modern recoloring of antique footage, Peter Jackson's They Shall Not Grow Old being a stellar example of adding a new dimension to old footage. There also was a music video by an artist named Gautier that involved sort of this white environment and painting being added. And while that was very much live and in person, I do like that idea. I do like that effect of having this discolored world become more vibrant by addition of artificial color. So step 1, of course, is gathering the footage. And for us to shoot what we needed to shoot for this project, it was a little less than an hour. We had a studio space that was pretty much white all the way around. We had some great daylight to work with. It had white props, white steps. So I got a variety of footage. I shot it both vertically and horizontally because at the time I wasn't really clear on how I was going to do this. Ultimately, it's going to be a vertical video, but I was okay getting a little bit of A, a little bit of B. I had a selfie stick tripod that allowed me to rotate my iPhone very quickly, which is what I filmed all of this on. I also used the cinematic effect on my iPhone, which is simply something that helps stabilize video, face track, and it blurs the background a little bit. It looks a little bit nicer unless you've got a lot of movement present, in which case that background blurring is like very, very obvious. And while this is a class about Procreate Dreams, I do feel, because it's video oriented, that we should talk about, gathering correct footage. And for our purposes, anything that is conceptual, you really should do your best to have the environment, the styling, whatever you put in front of the camera, be it a model, an actor, objects, you want all of that orchestrated towards the same goal. So in the case of that documentary I mentioned, They Shall Not Grow Old, Peter Jackson didn't film the footage, but every bit of footage that goes into it is geared towards the same goal, showcasing the reality of World War I and what it was like for those particular soldiers. And because it also added voices and color, it just kind of brought them to life in a way that a lot of antique footage doesn't. But it had the same theme. So if you are going to go out and film a person on a street for your footage and you've got to deal with graffiti, pedestrians, cars in the background, whatever else, you're really making it more difficult to do something conceptual, something thematic, because in video, you just can't edit out the annoying bits in the background like you can a photo. Now, step 2, I've got to prepare my footage. And since we're working with iPads for Procreate Dreams, I'm going to take advantage of the simple editing tools that iOS has. So we can crop our footage, of course. We can also take the ones that I shot horizontally and apply the vertical template to that, and I can move the footage around that way. We can manipulate some of the perspective, which is where my lines aren't necessarily straight all the way across and they're not directional enough that I'm happy with them. The reason why I didn't have these perfectly composed shots that don't require this sort of perspective correction is essentially at the same time we were in the studio, I was shooting stills, and there's some issues with camera placement. So you go at a golden hour because it's a really great time to capture light. It's very flattering on people, but it also has the issues of shadows. So you're going to find that you're going to have to place your camera somewhere where your shadow or the camera shadow aren't present on your people. And that might mean you get things that you need to edit the perspective of after the fact. The black and white conversion is something I prefer to do with the iOS editor rather than Procreate Dreams because it has filtration. And what filtration does is it assigns different tonal levels to different colors. So our model Bradley has really heavy red lipstick. And if you simply go in Procreate Dreams and take the saturation all the way down, it might not make that red pop against her white makeup as much as having a filter in the iOS video editor might. So while you do have access to an HSB control in Procreate Dreams, which is hue, saturation, and brightness, I find that that's not the same or as effective for my purposes as using the iOS video editor filters. It's really just a preference. You absolutely can take color footage straight into Procreate Dreams and desaturate it and have that grayscaled image to work with. Now that we have our footage, we're going to go ahead and open up Procreate Dreams. We have our little catalog to begin with. There is a plus icon in the upper right corner. We're going to tap that. As we scroll through our choices, we see that 4K social is an option, and we're going to go ahead and select empty. And now we see this stage and timeline. Stage being the top part, timeline being the bottom. This is where we're going to be for the remainder of this particular tutorial. There's a plus icon in the timeline area that allows you to bring in a track, photo, video, text, and files. And of course, we're going to start with our video. Bring that in. Your video is going to fit in the defined seconds that you have on the timeline, and it'll go a little bit across. I'm going to tell you right now that this earlier iteration of Procreate Dreams has some difficulty working with very large video clips. So I think for our purposes, we're going to stick to like 5-second clips. We're just going to do our edits on one single video at a time. So each Procreate Dream project is only going to have one. We're not going to be editing a bunch of stuff together right now in this format because it eats up a lot of memory on your iPad. And the more video you throw in here, the more glitches you'll face. And that's going to be frustrating. You might crash the application. I hope that this is something that stabilizes in future iterations of Procreate Dreams, and I definitely don't want to talk you out of working this way because you're dealing with crashes. I'm just telling you that we should probably scale our expectations down to something that's a lot smaller. I am going to be working at a frame rate that's pretty high, which means that I've got to colorize every frame, and that's pretty time intensive. So the idea of having 10 seconds of Bradley playing piano and colorizing 10 seconds worth of that. If it's 24 frames a second, that's 240 frames that I need to color everything in. That's a bit much. And also, I think 5 seconds of her piano playing is going to get her point across as much as 10 seconds will. We do live in a world with a lot faster cuts, a lot quicker edits, and whether or not somebody stares at something 5 seconds or 10 seconds is a make or break thing when you're actually making videos. You do not want to bore your audience. And you do not want the effect to wear out and become boring, even if it's just a difference of 5 seconds worth of time. Also, when you're learning software, you want to have small projects that teach you things. You don't want to overwhelm yourself with some sort of like giant epic idea that is going to be blowing people's socks off right out of the water. You just want to learn the thing. So when the time comes and you have the great idea, you can blow people's socks off. All right, so we've got our video in, and we're going to adjust the time of our timeline. We hit where it says Dream, and this is where we get all the properties to our project, including the frames per second, how many seconds you got, the pixel dimensions. That's under the Properties tab. The other things involving the stage and the timeline and sharing preferences, we don't need to worry about that at the moment. The only thing we care about is the Properties tab. So we are going to hit frames per second, and we're going to make sure it's what we want to work with. I'm working at 24. You may find that your effects look better at a lower frame rate on video, especially if you're doing something antique. Sometimes I think like 18 or 19 or 20 frames feels a bit more early 20th century, feels more choppy. When you get down to 12 and you're working with video, it definitely starts to look like a sequence of time-lapse photographs instead of video. But when you're working in animation and you're drawing, I think 12 frames looks great. You can zoom in and out of the timeline with a pinch zoom with your fingers on the timeline. Same with your stage. You can pinch zoom, move this guy around. And when you tap on your video track, you see these 4 red dots in the corners. This is where you can scale, and also if you hold in the center of it, you can reposition it around as needed. Other transformations you can do at this point involve rotating. So you tap the red dot and you have your little rotation. You can use your Apple Pencil to grab that, move it around. The 3-dot menu also allows for flipping and moving the anchor point. The anchor point is the target that everything rotates around. We have a playhead that allows us to zoom around on the video. Within the playhead are more controls. We'll get to that as needed. The next step is to add a track where we're going to do our color. And this is also with the plus icon. So you tap that, you see the options track, photo, video, text, files. Track is the one we're going to pick. And next to that plus icon is a drawing icon, a little squiggly line. This is where we get into our drawing tools. Now you see that the stage has suddenly become all white. It's not just that gray center that's going to show up on our final video when we place it on a phone. The reason why you have this full stage to work with outside of your final video is because you might want to have elements that come in and out of it. If I'm doing an animation, I might have like a huge landscape that I want to have pan through, almost like a video game side scroller. There's a lot of reasons why you might have things off stage from your on-screen workspace. Now that I'm in this drawing menu, I'm going to take that little tab that is right below my stage and pull down, and that will allow me to access the flipbook. The flipbook is where you can paint on individual frames, or if you're not working with photos or videos, you can draw on each individual frame, much like classic cartoon flipbook style. I have my drawing tools in the upper right corner. One is a brush, and I have plenty of brushes to choose from. When you open your Procreate Dreams, you're going to have a lot less brush options. This is because you can actually import things from regular Procreate over to Procreate Dreams. So I can import my brushes and my color palettes from there. And if you have worked with regular Procreate and you've imported your own brushes there, you know that there's a huge marketplace out there that has almost any kind of brush you could possibly want. It has stamps, so if you wanted to create maps, you could easily do that. It has textures, stuff that evokes particular artists. I use a Studio Ghibli brush set a lot of the time, and it just really enhances the amount of art that you can make, the style of art that you can make, the quality of the art that you can make. It's one of the reasons why people can create so much in Procreate Dreams or Procreate that they've never been able to make with just simple drawing implements in real life, non-digital tools like brushes and watercolor. A lot of those limitations that you have in the real world are just completely gone when you can collaborate with these incredible artists who've created templates and brushes and color palettes and other tools that you would never be able to utilize on your own. I have decided I'm going to work with this oil paint brush, and that my color palette is going to be one that I have called Gwen's World, which is something that I had imported in regular Procreate from a screenshot from Gwen Stacy's world in Spider-Verse 2. I love the color palette of that space. It's kind of evocative of a world that has a lot of painting in it and sort of watercolory backgrounds, and that's the vibe that I am going for with this particular project. So that's what we're gonna do. I need to paint on each individual frame of my footage, and I'm going to start by painting on the areas that do not move. These are the areas that will be the same in every single frame, and that's most of the background details. Not all of them, because there's going to be parts of the background where Bradley's arm or hair overlaps. So I'm going to save those for when I'm done with painting on Bradley herself. But go ahead and paint over those areas on this track. When I get to Bradley, when I get to the parts that move, I'm going to have to paint on every single frame. And that's going to have a look all of its own. You are totally welcome to paint on every single frame of inanimate objects that don't move. If you so desire, just realize that the amount of work that you're doing is going to be way more than if you work in this particular fashion. My painting is opaque and it looks kind of chunky. I'm selecting colors I don't think are going to compete with my main character. And once I have my painting, if I want to see how it interacts with the layer below, I'm going to long press within my frame and I'll see my blending options. One is overlay. This is the one that I'm likely to be using. You can absolutely use other ones if you think they're more appropriate for your project. I'm going to be using overlay for the majority of my painting. I do have eraser tools if I want to refine things, and because I have multiple objects that I'm painting in the background, I may want to do these in layers. Where you access layers is within this layers menu here. There's a plus icon so you can add layers and you can reorganize them. I tend to keep my stuff as it was in real life, which is my top layers, whatever's close to me, and whatever's far away is bottom layer. Just helps keep the color straight, especially if they're opaque colors and they need to overlap. To get this frame to fill my entire track, I'm going to hold it. There is an option that says fill duration. It'll fill your duration. If you had started your frame somewhere other than the very beginning of your track, you can either grab the handle from the edge of your track and drag it so it fills it out, or you can also pick it up by holding your Apple Pencil in the middle of the track and repositioning it. Now we get to the part where I'm going to be doing a lot of work. I'll be honest, it takes multiple days. Definitely don't sit in one place and do this the entire time. I'll watch a movie and do this sort of coloring because in a way it's work that doesn't require a lot of thought power, but you still have to focus and you still have to be in one spot to do it. So having something else going on that entertains you is a way that you can get a lot of work done and not feel like it's work. But I'm going to start by colorizing Bradley's arms. When I pick an object that I'm going to color, like skin tone, and it's going to be consistent through the entire video, this is something that I need to do it all in one clip, meaning if I'm colorizing a frame of a person and they've got hair, an outfit, and skin tone to color, I cannot be switching colors each time. I really need to pick one color, do everything that way, and then start over, begin on the close, and then do the close every single frame. The reason for this is switching between tools and switching between colors on a color palette will slow you down. It'll also confuse you. And one thing you don't need when you're doing this is confusion. You just need to focus on one area, do it, move it around, see how it looks, work on the second area. If there are adjacent frames where nothing is moving, for example, if she were to hold her hands in the same spot, I could avoid recoloring the next frame. When you tap on a frame, it has a plus icon, which is to add a frame. When you hold on a frame, it has a menu, and one of the options is duplicate. So it is possible that you could colorize a frame, she's not moving in the next one, you could duplicate it. However, for my purposes, because every frame up to that point is colorized, it's going to have a little bit of shift in between each frame, and I want to keep that consistent all the way through the video. So even the parts where she doesn't move around a lot, I'm going to have a new colored frame just to stay consistent. Because we're going to be coloring frame by frame, we are going to make use of the flip book, and this is this little tab right underneath your stage. You drag it down, and now your stage has increased in size, and you have these little rectangles that are each frame, and you can advance them. You can see what the last one was up to. If this was animation where we had drawings and we needed to reference where something was and predict where it's going to be, you tap the time code on the lower left and you see something that refers to onion skin. Because we're colorizing footage and we don't need to worry about where things were previously or where they're going, we don't really need to have onion skin here. In fact, it's kind of confusing when I get deep into this and I see where my coloring was the last frame. And I don't need to know that because I'm just referencing where her arms are as I'm colorizing her skin. To get out of the flipbook, you hit done in the upper right corner. That takes you back. At a certain point, you might ask yourself, do you need to set each frame to have that blending mode? And the answer is no. You can group frames, meaning you're going to put them all together as one file instead of these little disparate ones. And the group icon is next to the drawing icon. It's the one that's got overlapping rectangles to it. So you tap that, and then you can draw this red lightning lasso around frames or other media that you put in there. If you end up putting music in, if we wanted to group the video and our coloring, you could do that. There is a limit to how many subgroups you have, but we're not going to worry about that right now because we're not working that complex. That becomes an issue when we're doing our composite lesson, but not for this project. Once you have these selected, you long hold within one of your elements of your group and you have the option to group them. That's what you do. Now I can set that entire group to have my blending mode, and it will affect whatever the track is directly below it. Being that I've grouped this and I still have a lot more framework to do, definitely after where I've made this group, but also before, because I did not start my coloring process on the very beginning of the video. I'll do this work and then I'll ultimately group all of those together too. What happens when you group items is that it bounces it all to a new track and you end up with these empty tracks. I would encourage you to do a little cleanup as you're going and delete these tracks by long holding on them, because what's going to end up happening is you're going to have just something that's overly complicated and full of empty stuff that you don't need. And if it's going to be a layer affecting something below it, but you have 3 empty tracks in between, that might mess it up as well. We're going to be doing a rotoscoping project. Rotoscoping is a technique where people would draw or animate directly onto frames of film and frames of digital video. This has its roots in some of the early Walt Disney material. Almost all animators would get footage of somebody doing a dance and then do their own copy on top of that. That's why you got very lifelike animations in the Fleischer Studios Superman or the early Walt Disney stuff. Some of the more recent rotoscope projects that you might be familiar with include the music video for a-ha's Take On Me. This one involves switching between reality and an illustrated cartoon world. And one of my favorite rotoscope projects is a recent Chemical Brothers video called The Darkness That You Fear. This was the true inspiration for the rotoscope project that Bradley and I did. Now, rotoscoping doesn't have to be a very complicated process. In fact, it can be the simplest form of animation if you just wanted to have some sort of drawn effects that interact with your characters, your video. You could very easily create a new track above a video, and then using the drawing menu, go into the flipbook, advance frame by frame, and have little energy waves or squiggly lines or whatever sort of abstract effect you want to have come in and out of your video. It doesn't have to be as complicated as the old-timey sort of redraw a person entirely kind of effects that go back to the very earliest iterations of rotoscoping. I wanted to do something with footage that had flaws in it, and flaws in my case involved a cluttered background and the fact that we had to clip Bradley's wedding dress onto her to get it to fit, so that clip sticks out in some of our footage. Since there is no automated way to remove a background in Procreate Dreams, and you can't import footage that has an alpha, I decided to go ahead and just paint over the background entirely. Much like our colorization, there are parts of the background that aren't moving because I shot this on a tripod, so I'll go ahead and wipe those out, and the parts that are close to Bradley where she moves around and interacts with it, I'm going to go frame by frame and paint over them with this solid white. The white is opaque, and it's going to stay opaque. I'm using a brush that has kind of a jaggedy edge because I think that's the aesthetic I want to go for with this, something that's very expressive, something that absolutely contrasts with a lot of the kind of animated AI filters that you see on apps like Video Leap. I'm also doing this at a lower frame rate than the colorization for time's sake, for simplicity, but also because I think as an effect, it looks kind of cooler to be a lower frame rate. Once I've masked out everything on this layer just by painting it white, I now have the option to use masks to place effects not only on the white area, but also on the layers below my white area. And these mask options are within the menu when you long press on your track. You'll see you have options for a clipping mask and a mask. It kind of depends on the effect you want to go for, but because I wanted to have painterly abstract effects going on these layers, I'll make sure all my white is grouped together so it is a single layer. On a new track above it, I'm going to create these dot patterns, and the dot patterns are, and so from here it's actually quite a simple process. There's going to be patterns that go alongside the white, there's going to be textures and patterns that go alongside the video of Bradley and the piano, so those will be below my white layer. And then because the color schemes I tend to work with are very blue and gray and not necessarily super poppy, I do want to have an element that really leaps out. I'm also kind of visualizing this as a watery looking effect. I'm going to use watercolor textures on the track that is going to be masked with Bradley and the piano. So I think I'm going to draw a jellyfish and just make a simple frame by frame animation that once I've drawn this, I'll group them, which is this rectangular icon here. I'm going to draw around my group with the Apple Pencil, go into the menu in a long press within that section and group them. And now I can copy and paste my jellyfish effect as frequently as I want to see it within my video. Everything that I want to loop, I'll do as many drawings as are required, and then I'm going to group them, copy and paste. And you'll be surprised, and and this really allows for some lengthy video making that is creative but isn't too labor intensive. I'm not drawing on hundreds of frames. I'm drawing on as few frames as I need for my looping animation, grouping, copying, and pasting. So we're going to look at an alternate way to do your masks. When you have your video layer imported, you create a new layer above it. We'll use our drawing tool. We'll start drawing over our figure because we want our figure to show ultimately. And once we have enough frames drawn, we go ahead and group those. And then that layer is going to be set with the mask function. Now, the only thing that shows below is what we've painted over. It's the inverse of what we did in the prior project. You're allowed to be more precise if you want. You can add to your mask. You can also delete from your mask using the same drawing tools that you normally would. It's a good way to isolate a figure. Again, there's no automatic roto brush like you might find in After Effects, but for my purposes and my aesthetic, I actually like this flawed, hand-created look. I think it just has something unique and organic to it that you're not going to get in a lot of the automated programs. If you enjoyed this tutorial, check out my full Procreate Dreams courses in the links below. Best of luck in your own creative endeavors. So we're going to look at an alternate way to do your masks. When you have your video layer imported, you create a new layer above it. We'll use our drawing tool. We'll start drawing over our figure because we want our figure to show ultimately. And once we have enough frames drawn, we go ahead and group those. And then that layer is going to be set with the mask function. Now, the only thing that shows below is what we've painted over. It's the inverse of what we did in the prior project. You're allowed to be more precise if you want. You can add to your mask. You can also delete from your mask using the same drawing tools that you normally would. It's a good way to isolate a figure. Again, there's no automatic roto brush like you might find in After Effects, but for my purposes and my aesthetic, I actually like this flawed, hand-created look. I think it just has something unique and organic to it that you're not going to get in a lot of the automated programs. Collage video. This approach to photo and video editing in Procreate Dreams is based on an animated style I've seen in a lot of school-related kinds of shows, but in particular, the final credits of Spider-Man Far From Home. And I think it's because it references physical memorabilia, a vintage feel, nostalgia for the past, has a bit of a documentary or editorial approach to it. I really like this style, and I think it can feel fresh and engaging if for no other reason than you're making inanimate materials appear alive, but you're also keeping a lot of their physical qualities like shading, such as shading, or weird details that would just get lost if you were doing drawings. In general, I think collage is a cool personal style with a lot of handicraft apparent, but keeping a lot of their qualities, such as if you took a photograph of a physical object and it was shaded in one direction, but you wanted to transform and rotate this around in your video, that shading would stay consistent with the original photograph, not with the reality of your video. And I think that's kind of cool. It's kind of a trippy effect that people don't think about. In general, I think collage is a cool personal style with a lot of handcraft apparent in the final product. So for our collage animation, we wanted to create some sort of advertisement for Valentine's Day, just something cool to really stand out against everything else that was going to be on social media at the time. And when you're trying to communicate directly to people and you have about 3 to 5 seconds to catch their interest, the most simple design is best. Even when you're doing something that's collage-y, collage tends to get very cluttered. So keeping it simple, it's going to be a figure and it's going to be a background that has a texture reminiscent of construction paper. And I wanted to make use of the energy effects within Procreate and Procreate Dreams, so clouds and fire. The photographs of the figure I had taken individually and done cutouts in Photoshop. Very easy to do cutouts in a number of applications, Photoshop just being my preference because I've used it for decades. So dealing with the photographs, we shot a couple positions where one would have a bow and arrow for Cupid and faces. I layered them in Photoshop and did cutouts. It's very easy to layer within regular Procreate and do cutouts. We address this in our lesson on compositing, but just know that you can either automatically select a background and remove it in any number of applications, including regular Procreate, or use an eraser tool to wipe out elements of a photograph that you don't need in Procreate Dreams and in regular Procreate. Because I had these as a Photoshop file, you can see all layers turned on. It's an arm up, an arm down, and a different head. And then the arrow itself, I took a photo with my phone and just included it because it needs to separate from the bow at some point. And when she fires this arrow, it's going to need to be drawn back on a string, so I did not need the string as part of my photograph. I'll draw the string in as needed. If you import a photograph directly into Procreate Dreams, it is not going to have the layers separated, and there is no way currently to separate those layers. If you import something that has layers into regular Procreate, so a Photoshop file with these different iterations of my Cupid, I have access to those layers in regular Procreate, and I can simply take that photo, split screen between Procreate Dreams and regular Procreate, drag it over into my movie in Procreate Dreams. All right, so step one, I have dragged my collage set of images over to Procreate Dreams. I'm going to find the background, simple construction paper look. And the reason why I'm going for construction paper specifically is because it evokes the kind of homemade Valentine's Day crafts that we used to do when I was a kid. I'm going to illustrate some clouds, and I'm going to do these as frame by frame animation because I want these clouds to move and have a different sort of life to them. I'm not going to do every single frame of cloud animation. I'm just going to do as many as I feel is necessary to stay interesting. I'm going to group them, copy them, and then loop the groups. I'm also going to group the cloud layers with my photograph because this is the part where I want to get the timing down right for where I'm going to put my cuts on where these photos change. So with the clouds and Cupid in a group, I'm going to do some transformation across the timeline, move them in and out, and I'm going to do this using something called the record button. This is where you do performance capture. The record button is the square next to the play. I'll go ahead and start my animation off the page, and then with the record button turned on, float it in with a little bit of a bounce, the way that I imagine somebody writing a cloud would have. I think I got this idea from the old Super Mario Brothers game. When we do playback on this, you'll see that it has a very natural kind of flow to it when you use performance capture. Not great for every single thing you might want to do in animation, but certainly pretty good for this particular one. Now that I know where my character is positioned, I can start making cuts to where one pose ends and another begins. So to do this, I need to break apart my photo track into its individual layers. It's a long press on the track. You also have an option that says convert photos to layers. Now, you won't have this option if you import something like a Photoshop file that has layers directly into Procreate Dreams. You do have to go through regular Procreate, have access to the layers there, and then drag that file over to Procreate Dreams. That's where you'll see this convert layers into tracks menu. Having done that, I can place incisions with the edit menu. That's a long press on the playhead where you see edit, and you can start cutting your photographs to where you want them to fit. So this pose needs to end here, and this pose needs to start here. And this is where I can also delete the remaining parts that I don't need with a long press press on those parts of the tracks. The arrow needs to change position. So what I'm going to do is have an arrow that conforms to one pose and an arrow that conforms to another. Once again, I split those tracks, so I have two separate arrows, and now it's just a matter of repositioning them. This one that is aiming at a 45-degree angle is the one that's going to be set loose and fly. And to create a little bit of verisimilitude, meaning reality for that, I'm going to draw in the lines of the bow that are stretched. And it's going to be just a briefest split second on screen, but that stretched bowstring, I do want that to conform to the arrow as it's being released. It's got to push it forward. I plan on putting a sound effect with it, and it's gonna be really cool in my brain. So just a matter of drawing some straight lines as the arrow will fly off. Now, having the arrow fly is not going to be a performance capture because I don't want it to go all over the place in sort of an organic form like the clouds. I want it to go in a straight line. So to get a straight line motion as I do my transform, as I reposition where the arrow is, I hold my screen with one finger, and this allows for snapping, meaning it's going to transform in a single direction rather than in a direction that goes up, down, side, side, anything that doesn't conform to the snapped line. The final elements of this, I'm going to fade in some speed lines. These are simply loops drawn on their own layer. Again, it's kind of the same thing as the clouds. I'll draw as many as I think I need, maybe 5 to 10 iterations of something, and then I'll simply group them, copy, paste, and loop it. For them to fade in, I simply use opacity filter, set opacity to 0 at the beginning, and then very quickly get it to 100% or whatever level you think is appropriate for what you're doing. I originally hadn't thought about having fire at the end of the arrow, but it just seemed to me that adding to the silliness of this premise was worthwhile. So I drew in some fire loops, including a spark where the fire would ignite as something travels through the atmosphere. You can imagine it heating up and having that spark where it just bursts into flames. And that's what we have here. My fire is a combination of some of the luminance brushes that come with Procreate and some fire brushes that I downloaded. Oftentimes, I find these brushes are a little bit too sharp, so you can use the smudge tool, which is the thing that looks like a finger attached to a hand in your drawing menu, or you can use the filter that is Gaussian blur within your playhead effects menu. If you enjoyed this tutorial, check out my full Procreate Dreams courses in the links below. Best of luck in your own creative endeavors. All right, so step one, I have dragged my collage set of images over to Procreate Dreams. I'm going to find the background, simple construction paper look. And the reason why I'm going for construction paper specifically is because it evokes the kind of homemade Valentine's Day crafts that we used to do when I was a kid. I'm going to illustrate some clouds, and I'm going to do these as frame by frame animation because I want these clouds to move and have a different sort of life to them. I'm not going to do every single frame of cloud animation. I'm just going to do as many as I feel is necessary to stay interesting. I'm going to group them, copy them, and then loop the groups. I'm also going to group the cloud layers with my photograph because this is the part where I want to get the timing down right for where I'm going to put my cuts on where these photos change. So with the clouds and Cupid in a group, I'm going to do some transformation across the timeline, move them in and out, and I'm going to do this using something called the record button. This is where you do performance capture. The record button is the square next to the play. I'll go ahead and start my animation off the page, and then with the record button turned on, float it in with a little bit of a bounce, the way that I imagine somebody writing a cloud would have. I think I got this idea from the old Super Mario Brothers game. When we do playback on this, you'll see that it has a very natural kind of flow to it when you use performance capture. Not great for every single thing you might want to do in animation, but certainly pretty good for this particular one. Now that I know where my character is positioned, I can start making cuts to where one pose ends and another begins. So to do this, I need to break apart my photo track into its individual layers. It's a long press on the track. You also have an option that says convert photos to layers. Now, you won't have this option if you import something like a Photoshop file that has layers directly into Procreate Dreams. You do have to go through regular Procreate, have access to the layers there, and then drag that file over to Procreate Dreams. That's where you'll see this convert layers into tracks menu. Having done that, I can place incisions with the edit menu. That's a long press on the playhead where you see edit, and you can start cutting your photographs to where you want them to fit. So this pose needs to end here and this pose needs to start here. And this is where I can also delete the remaining parts that I don't need with a long press on those parts of the tracks. The arrow needs to change position. So what I'm going to do is have an arrow that conforms to one pose and an arrow that conforms to another. Once again, I split those tracks. So I have two separate arrows, and now it's just a matter of repositioning them. This one that is aiming at a 45-degree angle is the one that's going to be set loose and fly. And to create a little bit of verisimilitude, meaning reality for that, I'm going to draw in the lines of the bow that are stretched. And it's going to be just a briefest split second on screen, but that stretched bowstring, I do want that to conform to the arrow as it's being released. It's got to push it forward. I plan on putting a sound effect with it, and it's going to be really cool in my brain. So just a matter of drawing some straight lines as the arrow will fly off. Now, having the arrow fly is not going to be a performance capture because I don't want it to go all over the place in sort of an organic form like the clouds. I want it to go in a straight line. So to get a straight line motion as I do my transform, as I reposition where the arrow is, I hold my screen with one finger, and this allows for snapping, meaning it's going to transform in a single direction rather than in a direction that goes up, down, side, side, anything that doesn't conform to the snapped line. The final elements of this, I'm going to fade in some speed lines. These are simply loops drawn on their own layer. Again, it's kind of the same thing as the clouds. I'll draw as many as I think I need, maybe 5 to 10 iterations of something, and then I'll simply group them, copy, paste, and loop it. For them to fade in, I simply use opacity filter, set opacity to 0 at the beginning, and then very quickly get it to 100% or whatever level you think is appropriate for what you're doing. I originally hadn't thought about having fire at the end of the arrow, but it just seemed to me that adding to the silliness of this premise was worthwhile. So I drew in some fire loops, including a spark where the fire would ignite as something travels through the atmosphere. You can imagine it heating up and having that spark where it just bursts into flames. And that's what we have here. My fire is a combination of some of the luminance brushes that come with Procreate and some fire brushes that I downloaded. Oftentimes, I find these brushes are a little bit too sharp, so you can use the smudge tool, which is the thing that looks like a finger attached to a hand in your drawing menu, or you can use the filter that is Gaussian blur within your playhead effects menu. When we're going to composite footage, that is a good time to use an outside program or app because background removal is something very automated in other programs. Being that this is a Procreate Dreams course, I'm obliged to stay within the focus of our lesson, so you can absolutely import a photograph on a track, use the eraser to chop out the chunks that you don't want or need, and also duplicate that same track or photo and erase out all the sections until you have a series of movable parts that you can make a puppet out of. An arm on one track, a body on another, a head on another. Then you would group these individual tracks to be one subject that you could then move around, much like a paper doll. I'm also saying that many of the goals of our projects are best served mixing applications. With photographs, I've been working with the Adobe Creative Suite since 1995, so that's my go-to process. When I take these photos, I tend to import them straight into Lightroom. I'll do cleanup there, such as removal of the straps on the wings, and Photoshop now has automated processes to remove backgrounds. It didn't work 100% on these wings, but that is how I did some of these removals. I'll go ahead and do a quick background removal in Procreate Dreams with an imported photograph. Now, since you're already working in an iOS environment and likely have regular Procreate alongside Procreate Dreams, other methods might include a long press of a photograph, which allows you to cut out a subject and then paste it onto the Notes app. Depending on how clean your backgrounds are, in regular Procreate, you can use the selection tools and erase out or remove chunks. There are many apps out there that can aid you in doing this cutout phase, but as we're doing composites, we need to know the limitations of Procreate Dreams. So there currently is no selection tool to do this removal there. Also, you cannot erase on a video, nor is there any sort of keying features, meaning that if you film against a green screen, you have the method within Procreate Dreams to remove that green screen. Again, there are other apps that can do this for you. CapCut Pro, After Effects, Adobe Premiere. the difficulty trying to do some sort of composite with keyed out video that has this empty channel called the alpha is that Procreate Dreams does not work with alpha channels. That part of compositing we are not able to do, but we can do many other things. What we are most interested in our composites is basically what you see in films with composites, either a fictional environment, such as a lot of science fiction films where they build out these fantastic cities, vehicles, spaces, none of which exist in reality, and also including special effects. And in my case, I was thinking specifically of superhero effects like flight, energy auras, and so forth. Now, when we talk about expanding the environments, backgrounds, camera moves, elements like wind, lighting, and more are part of that. It's all environmental. The buildings could be artificially generated or matted in, much like the backgrounds of films like Star Wars were actually paintings, but just seen from a distance and out of focus. Out of all the techniques we have looked at, this is the one that requires the most forethought and planning because you have to visualize ahead of time what exactly you need from your photos or videos for this project. It's a big difference to see through a video camera or a phone and know you're aiming in the right direction and perspective, as we did with our colorizing project, and it's way different to know what you need when you have to place a character, say, on top of a building, and I need to light them properly in the photograph, and I really need the light to aim at her in a three-dimensional manner as I want the rest of the environment to have. Now, in a normal film, showing an expanded environment means the camera travels around it. So if Batman is on a rooftop, the camera will start at ground level and swoop up and meet Batman there. As virtual cameras and 3D elements also aren't part of Procreate Dreams at the time of making this, what it really means is we're going to have to move and scale our way through the environment, which means all environmental elements will be in a group as well as our character, so we can move and scale our way to her. The only way around this that I could think of at the time of this recording is to use a third-party 3D generating software and have your cameras move around buildings and alleyways and such, export those as frames and import them into Procreate Dreams. A little more complicated than we want to get into. Also, I can't stress this enough, I think having limitations really elevates your creativity. When you can do anything and everything with all the software tools at your disposal, not only is it overwhelming, you have too many choices, but I think the work tends to look like the most bland version because honestly, nobody's an expert at everything, and being able to create something in Maya or Unreal Engine and then bringing that in with this Procreate Dreams stuff, you might come up with something really cool and unique, but you also might just have a mess of the quickest things you could get done in each one of them to get the project done. The other way to move three-dimensionally through an environment is to literally draw your way through it. So if this bat is going to fly through this cave, I've animated the bat and its swooping movements, and I've animated the background to travel, as opposed to what you might think of where you have a static background and a character just walks across it. The important thing, if you're going to do a scene that has some kind of complex effect to it, some sort of composition, is maybe thumbnail it out or certainly write a list of what you want. And there are other resources online where you can find frames, stills, screenshots from movies that are good inspiration. Oftentimes I will drop these into Procreate Dreams or Procreate and just sort of create right on top of that. There's no shame in taking inspiration nor sketching above, because you can absolutely make any inspiration your own when you combine extra elements. The real issue with any sort of copying, tracing, swiping is when you 100% borrow from the original and add nothing of your own. So there are some shots of cityscapes that I designed within Procreate and Procreate Dreams that have photographs that I took, and it has stuff that I auto-generated through AI. There's things in it that I use Google image search or stock footage and compiled, but the final result is absolutely something that I added to. It wasn't a thing that I 100% auto-generated out of AI and just left as is. This really isn't any different than how regular movies are made. There's quite a bit of stock footage that goes into almost any movie. I met a man who created the storm footage that got used in the background of some Marvel films, for example. Procreate Dreams itself is not it's not knowing to eliminate but I do want to set you up for success, and I do want to give you some ideas on how you can create more complex animations and stories in Procreate Dreams, but I don't want to overwhelm you with how complex things could be. I want to tell you how simple things could be. I created this rain element and realized it's going to be raining through the entire sequence, all these different cuts. So rather than redraw the rain element on everything, I can copy it from one Procreate Dreams file, open another, paste it right in. And you can do that with lighting, you can do that with video tracks, audio tracks, anything that you think you might need to reuse in multiple scenes. If you're creating something that's a bit of a narrative and has multiple scenes, you can absolutely copy and paste those files. Makes it really easy really shortens the amount of time that you spend drawing things. You cannot work in 3D in Procreate Dreams, but you can create an illusion of three-dimensionality by having a fake camera lens blur. So this composition is a real simple 4x5 image I shot over 20 years ago, to be honest, and thought, wouldn't it be fun to throw in some large format Ansel Adams style photography in Procreate Dreams? I broke it apart into the 3 layers. We have the fence, we have the Superstition Mountains in Arizona, and we have the clouds behind them. And with those 3 layers, we're going to be going towards the Superstition Mountains, so almost over the fence. The way to create a depth effect is twofold. One, you scale everything in the large group, so everything from the original photograph, you scale it all at once, but on the individual layers, you scale or move things that are nearer to the viewer at a greater speed. This is an effect called Parallax. It's the same thing when you drive around and you see the bushes and other cars zoom by really fast because they're right next to you, but things that are far away, like mountains and clouds, appear to move much slower. It's just a matter of perspective. The other thing to create fake depth within this scene is to apply the Gaussian blur as we get over the fence. So we're pretending that there is a difference between these 3 layers. And in After Effects or other programs where you can set up 3D, there absolutely could be a difference in depth to these layers. Procreate Dreams being a 2D animation app, no difference in depth. You're going to have to fake it. Things close to you move faster, and you can put them out of focus if you want. If something close to you is out of focus, the thing far away should be in focus, and vice versa. If something close to you is in focus, then the thing farther away is out of focus, and you can absolutely fade that focus blur effect throughout your animations so it looks like you're approaching or receding from a landscape, a subject, whatever it is you want to have the focus of your animation. I've also found in compositions that having some difference in focus really draws attention to the important things. So if you have characters in a fully realized setting, do make some change in the backdrop to have the characters pop. That could be a change in the saturation, could be a change in the brightness, could be a change in the blur effect, but having everything in focus, same amount of saturation, same color, really negates the ability of a viewer to focus on what you would ideally want them to focus on. I want to congratulate you for making it through this course and taking the time to watch all the lessons. Learning a new application is often very overwhelming, especially when you're dealing with multimedia and you're trying to think of what's the good outcome, how are these effects going to play into each other. There definitely is a learning curve to Procreate Dreams. A lot of the controls are hidden, not easily accessible, but after a couple days of use, you're going to catch on to all the gestures, and each project you do is going to give you ideas for the next project you do. One of the reasons why I make references to earlier forms of animation is because generally those principles can apply to what we're doing today, even in the 21st century. So I recommend more multimedia works from the 20th century. Those are wonderful guideposts for what we want to do in the 21st century. Once again, thanks for your time and attention. Best of luck in your own creative endeavors. Talk to you next time.